Hello and welcome to another lecture. I would like to talk now about Logic Chapter 1, Section 5, the mapping of arguments or diagramming of arguments. Essentially what we're going to do here is what the mapping does is it allows us to look at how the inferential link works, how it reaches the conclusion. The idea is, are the points of the argument, are the premises just sort of one after another? This adds to this, which adds to this, which adds to this, and sort of an adding up effect? Or are they each independently sort of just more evidence to try to prove it, or are they working together in some way? So that's all a map is trying to do, or a diagram of an argument is doing, is it's trying to get you to say, how do I see these? Are these dependent upon each other, these premises? Are these premises simply adding up? Are they all at the same level? And that's what the maps do. So the first one we're going to talk about is what we call the vertical pattern. Now essentially the vertical pattern is the idea that you say one thing and is this on the right here we have this sort of these circles, and the idea is the conclusion is always the bottom circle, and the one corresponds, if we look over at this argument on the left, we see that it says selling of human organs such as hearts, kidneys, or corneas should be outlawed. Essentially those are, that's the first sentence, that's a statement, and that's the conclusion. And so the idea is all the others are premises. And what happens is number one is what everything's pointing towards. But in this, number 4 is pointing towards number 3, and number 3 is pointing towards number 2, and number 2 is ultimately pointing towards number 1. And so the idea here is that each one is sort of building upon each other. And the idea here is, you prove one thing, and it proves another thing, which proves another thing, and which proves another thing. We can sort of think about an argument where you might say, we're not going to be able to go today because we won't have time, and we don't have time because we were running late, and we were running late because of another problem, and that problem came about because of this problem. And the idea is here is each point is sort of, this caused us to be late, and this being late caused us not to have enough time, and not having enough time is why we won't be able to go. And so the idea is each one is building upon the next one. It's the first point proves the next point, which proves the next point, and they're not working together, they're not all pointing to the conclusion. The conclusion is sort of point by point trying to prove what it wants to prove. So we can follow this one. Selling of human organs such as hearts, kidneys, and corneas should be outlawed. That's our conclusion. Allowing human organs to be sold will inevitably lead to a situation in which only the rich will be able to afford transplants. This is because whenever something scarce is bought and sold as a commodity, the price always goes up. The law of supply and demand requires it. So essentially what happens is it should be outlawed. The conclusion is supported by number 2. Allowing human organs to be sold will inevitably lead to a situation in which only the rich will be able to afford transplants. And that's sort of number 2. That's pointing towards why we need to be outlawed. Number 3, it says this is because, which means number 2 is being supported by number 3. And number 3 is simply a rule that helps lead the particular statement, more of a particular statement, the law of supply and demand is general, which then leads to a slightly more particular statement, number 3, which then leads to number 2, which then leads to number 1. And so it's a vertical pattern. It's vertical, it's going up and down instead of any other way. And then we have what we call the horizontal independent pattern. The idea here is they aren't building upon each other, but each point is independently pointing towards the conclusion. And when we say it's independently, that's sort of an important point with the independent pattern, is it has to be independent. The idea is each of these points, they aren't dependent upon the others. You could remove number 1, and number 2 and 3 are still pointing towards it. Now number 1 helps add evidence, and number 2 helps add evidence, but even number 3 would maybe be enough to reach the conclusion. So here's our argument. The gun had John's fingerprints on. John had a reason to kill her. John can't account for his whereabouts at the time of the murder. Therefore, John should, I didn't put the word therefore in this right up, but it should be there. Therefore, John should be a suspect in the murder. So the conclusion is John should be a suspect in the murder. Each one of these points to that. John's fingerprints are on the gun. John had reason. John can't account for his whereabouts. Each of these is pointing towards that conclusion. And so we could say, but they aren't dependent upon each other. You don't need them all. It's just more and more evidence. So essentially, each one's pointing towards the conclusion, each one's pointing towards something else, but they aren't dependent upon each other. On the other hand, we have what we call the horizontal dependent pattern, aka conjoint premises, and this is where they're pointing directly towards the conclusion of the premises, but they're also working together to prove it. And so here, getting people off welfare requires changing behavior patterns. That's our conclusion. Most people on welfare are high school dropouts, use drugs and alcohol, or are single parents. These behavior patterns prevent them from improving their lives without government assistance. Okay, so the case here is most people on welfare are high school dropouts, blah blah blah. Which I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the statement that is being made by this arguer. I'm not evaluating the factual claim. I'm just saying, that is what the claim here is. And then the other claim is these behavior patterns prevent us from improving their lives without government assistance. Well, number 2 isn't pointing to number 3, and number 3 isn't pointing to number 2, so it's not a vertical, but instead it's pointing out something about them, and it's saying, here's another statement about that. This behavior pattern, this part of number 2, adds up with it to point towards number 1. And so 2 and 3 are working together. They both sort of add together. You can't remove one. If you remove one, it kind of leaves a big hole in this argument. So you need them both to work together. And so we note that with just a line or somehow grouping 2 and 3 together and then pointing towards 1 together. Now, there's also a question about, what about multiple conclusions? Suppose you have an argument like dropping out of school and having children outside of wedlock are 2 primary causes of poverty. Therefore, that should be 2 TO instead of the number 2. In poverty, we must keep people in school. Also, we must encourage people to marry before having children. It appears we have 2 conclusions. Therefore, number 2 and also number 3. Right? It seems that there are 2 conclusions. So it would perhaps be the case that you should have a 1 point to both 2 and 3. But remember, there's only 1 conclusion to an argument. So we would map it as we do on the right here, where 1 points to number 2 and then 1 points to number 3. And we say there's actually 2 arguments and 2 different, so the premise is this premise in both arguments, both the one that has number 2 as a conclusion and the one that has number 3 as the conclusion. Now, the mapping doesn't have to stop with just a simple, 1 level. It can go quite deep. As a matter of fact, here is one where, this argument here, you can have a vertical pattern combined with a conjoint premises pattern combined with a horizontal independent pattern, and you could have one with 87 premises and you could map the whole thing out. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do that, but it is kind of an interesting thing because oftentimes what happens is some of the final premises are oftentimes the person will give arguments to prove those points, as is this case. It's number 1 is a premise, number 4 is a premise, number 6 is a premise, but number 2 is essentially a premise supporting number 1, and number 3 is a premise supporting number 4. And so we would map all these all these levels or all these premises, layers. Rhinos in Kenya are threatened with extinction because poachers are killing them for their horn. So rhinos, number 1, are threatened with extinction, and that's supported by number 2, which we have over on our map. Since the rhino has no natural predators, so number 3 is pointing to number 4, it does not need its horn to survive. It doesn't need its horn. Has no natural predators, therefore it doesn't need its horn. 3 points to number 4. Thus, as a conclusion indicator, which is why the conclusion is down there at the bottom, there should be a program to capture rhinos and remove their horns. Number 6, such a pattern would eliminate the incentive to kill them. No supports on that, that's just pointing also towards the conclusion. But numbers 1, rhinos in Kenya are threatened with extinction. Number 4, it does not need its horn to survive, and such a program removes the horns, would eliminate the incentive to kill them. All point towards we need to create that program. Okay? Now in this case, you'd say, well, are those each independent? Well, no. You need all those premises to work conjointly because, rhinos in Kenya are threatened with extinction. Therefore, we need a program to remove their horns. Well, that's not sufficient to prove that conclusion. It's only when you add it with number 4 and number 6 that it really adds up. Those are working together as a group. Okay? And that ends that lecture. Oh, I was going to make a note here before I let you go. One thing to keep, with this one, I'm also going to talk a little bit about how to draw. I have 3 videos for 1.5, and one of the videos is going to be simply how to create these maps in Word or in other programs. I'm going to show you how to do it in the latest version of Word. And the case is I'm going to show you how to do it in the latest version of Word. And the case, so you can kind of follow along, but I'm also going to tell you what what I'm going to tell you in this video. I'll tell you it right now. Watch the video if you want, or you can stop. But you could also scan and hand do this, and then scan it in and send it to me, or put these in drop boxes. That would be fine as well. And if you don't have a scanner, there are scanners available on campus in the library. Ask a librarian. As well as if you don't live near campus, you could call around and find a place probably nearby you. But I know within Champaign and a lot of towns, Kinko's does have it. I know in Champaign they charge 30 cents per minute to use their computer and scanner, which if you went in there and you had them show you how to do it, you could use it again later. There'll be a few things where that would be very useful. And essentially, you could scan stuff in and use their scanners and probably get it done in 4 or 5 minutes and only cost you a couple bucks. And so if you're not near campus or you can't find a place, that's also an option. Just wanted to throw that out there. So that's what I'm going to tell you. Is I'm going to show you how to do it, as well as tell you consider scanning. Just do it by hand and scan. That's probably the easiest. That's the way I would do it if I were you. All right. Thank you. Have a good day.